Hello everybody, this is Cap of cODeAclysm, and I would like to welcome you to the 6th video in my beginner C++ tutorial series. So in this video we are going to be covering loops. So there are 3 main loops that you're going to come across in C++, and those are the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop. And we are also going to cover a 4th loop in this video called the for each loop. So the first one we're going to cover here is the simplest of the loops, in my opinion, the while loop. So I'm just going to declare a short here named thing and set it equal to 0. And now the syntax for the while loop is pretty much the same as an if statement, only instead of the keyword if, you use while. So while, open parentheses, and braces, and in these parentheses you have a condition that can evaluate to true or false, and while this condition is true, it is going to execute the code that we put in here. So we're going to say while thing is less than 10, we want it to print out thing. Oh, whoops. And plus, we want to always update your control variable in your while loop, or else you will have an infinite loop. So we're just going to say increment thing with the increment operator. So let's just hit Control S and Control F5, and as you can see, it counted from 0 to 9. Because each time we go through, we print out thing, and then we update thing, or increment thing. And it does that until this evaluates to false, which is when it would reach 9, because then after it prints it out as 9, it updates it, or increments it to 10, so then it is no longer less than 10, and this evaluates to false and it doesn't run the loop. So that's a pretty simple concept. The next loop that we're going to look at here is the do while loop. So the do while loop is different from the while loop because the condition is not evaluated until after the block of code is run. So the syntax is, first you have the keyword do, and then your braces here, and then you have whatever code you want to run inside of these braces, and then you have your while statement and your condition. So this means that whatever you put in here is by default automatically going to run at least once. You know it's going to run once. And in my experience, the most useful use of a do while loop is for kind of a simple error checking. So we can have a little example of that here. If we print out, enter a number between 0 and 500, and then we repurpose thing to store the value that's entered. And then down here we can say, while thing is greater than 500 or thing is less than 0, we want it to run this. And you can have compound conditions in a while statement or do while statement, just like you can in an if statement. So if we run this, as you can see, it says enter a number between 0 and 500, but I'm not going to do that because we want to test this out. So let's put in 550. it reruns it and says enter a number between 0 and 500. So let's enter negative 10. Enter a number between 0 and 500. So this time let's enter 300. And as you can see, it accepted that because it was between the range of 0 and 500. So that's kind of a pretty useful use of a do while loop, and it kind of gives you the concept of it. So let's move on to the for loop. And we're not going to need this for the for loop. So a for loop is a little bit more complicated than the previous two loops. A for loop requires three different things. Your control variable, of course, your condition, and then your updating of the control variable. So for tradition's sake, I'm going to use I and set it equal to 0. And you separate each one with a semicolon. So that's our control variable. And then here is our condition. We want while I is less than 10 plus I. And of course the code within these braces is going to run as long as I is less than 10. So we're just going to see out I end L. Control S, Control F5. So as you can see, just like our while loop, it counted from 0 to 9. And this is probably going to be the loop that you're going to use the most, because it's general enough to where you can use it in a whole lot of different situations. You can use it to iterate through containers, or just, really endless possibilities with for loops. So the last loop that we're going to cover here is the for each loop. So the for each loop was added in C++11 pretty much specifically for iterating through containers, which is why I've included the vector here. So we're going to make a vector of shorts. We're going to name it things, and we're going to set it equal to 3, 5, 1, 6. Why not? So then down here we're going to have our for each loop. So the syntax for the for each loop is the for each keyword. Oh, there we go. Oh, whoa. Hello. And then of course you have your parentheses. Sometimes Visual Studio gets on my nerves with that. So we want for each, and then you have a temporary variable to store each element that it gets from the container. So we're going to say for each x in things. Oh, there we go. So for each x in things, so when it iterates through here, it is going to store each of these values into x so that we can use them in the loop. So in this case, we're just going to print out each element in the container, in the vector. So we're going to have cout, and then just x. That simple. Control S, Control F5, and as you can see, it printed out all the elements. You can do this with a for loop, and most of the time I do this with a for loop, because then you can use your control variable in different ways for different purposes, which I'll show you here in a second. You can also do that with the for each loop, but I just think it's more convenient to just go ahead and do it with the for loop. So we're going to make a for loop here. We're going to say for int I while I is less than things dot size. Oh my goodness. Plus plus I, and have our ending parenthesis there. So now I'm going to say cout, and then I space position is, and then things and subscript I and L. So now we're going to have the position that we're in, which is I, and then the value that is in that position within the container. So we have Control S and Control F5. Oh, we have an issue. Let's see here. Oh, yep. My bad, guys. Okay, so let's try this again now. Control S, Control F5, and there we go. So in the 0 position, we have 3. In the 1 position, we have 5. In the 2 position, we have 1. And in the 3 position, we have 6. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's really all there is to loops. I would encourage you guys to kind of practice and play around with this stuff, because of course that's how you learn. And don't worry about vector. I'll cover that when we get into containers. But this is the last of our control structure videos. So now we can really get into the fun stuff with our containers and strings and methods and all that kind of stuff. So thanks for watching, and I will see you again in the next video.